this is the work of a mathematical mind of no common caliber. It is in fact the hallmark of genius, that infinite capacity for taking pains. The ultimate aim of all this carefully considered activity was to produce the greatest possible number of men on the battlefield, which on occasion had been chosen months in advance of the actual event. Bourrienne gives his celebrated eyewitness account of the first consul in the early days of the Italian campaign of 1800, lying full length on the floor, pushing colored pins into his maps and saying, "I shall fight him here, on the plain of the Scrivia," with that uncanny prescience which was in reality the product of mental calculations of computer-like complexity. After considering every possible course of action open to the Austrian melas, Bonaparte eliminated them one by one, made allowance for the effect of chance on events, and came up with the answer, subsequently borne out by the events of June 14th on the field of Marengo, which lies, surely enough, on the plain bounded by the rivers Bormida and Scrivia. From Characters, by Jean de la Bruyère. The warrior and the statesman, like the skillful gambler, do not make their luck, but prepare for it, attract it, and seem almost to determine their luck. Not only are they, unlike the fool and the coward, adept at making use of opportunities when these occur, they know furthermore how to take advantage, by means of precautions and wise measures, of such and such an opportunity, or of several at once. If one thing happens, they win. If another, they are still the winners. The same circumstance often makes them win in a variety of ways. These prudent men may be praised for their good fortune as well as their good management, and rewarded for their luck as well as for their merits. From The Art of Maneuver, by Robert R. Leonhard. Expanding on the issue of directive control, Lind introduces the reader to a decision-making model known as the Boyd cycle. Named for Colonel John Boyd, the term refers to the understanding that war consists of the repeated cycle of observation, orientation, decision, and action. Colonel Boyd constructed his model as a result of his observations of fighter combat in the Korean War. He had been investigating why American fighter pilots had been consistently able to best enemy pilots in dogfights. His analysis of opposing aircraft led to some startling discoveries. Enemy fighters typically outperformed their American counterparts in speed, climb, and turning ability, but the Americans had the advantage in two subtly critical aspects. First, the hydraulic controls allowed for faster transition from one maneuver to another. Second, the cockpit allowed for a wide field of view for the pilot. The result was that the American pilots could more rapidly observe and orient to the tactical situation moment by moment. Then, having decided what to do next, they could quickly change maneuvers. In battle, this ability to rapidly pass through the observation, orientation, decision, action loop, the Boyd cycle, gave the American pilots a slight time advantage. If one views a dogfight as a series of Boyd cycles, one sees that the Americans would repeatedly gain a time advantage each cycle, until the enemy's actions become totally inappropriate to the changing situations. Hence, the American pilots were able to out-Boyd cycle the enemy, thus outmaneuvering him and finally shooting him down. Colonel Boyd and others then began to question whether this pattern might be applicable to other forms of warfare as well. From The Art of Maneuver, by Robert R. Leonhard. Mobility, defined as the ability to project power over distance, is another characteristic of good chess. It is the goal of a good chess player to ensure that each of his pieces can exert pressure upon a maximum number of squares rather than being bottled up in a corner, surrounded by other pieces. Hence, the chess master looks forward to pawn exchanges, infantry battles, if you will, not because he is trying to wear down the enemy, but because he knows that he can project the power of his rooks, mechanized forces, down the resulting open files. In this manner, the chess master fights in order to move. This idea is central to maneuver warfare theory. And lastly, from Samurai Zen, The Warrior Koans, by Trevor Leggett. Number 71. The Victory in the Midst of 100 Enemies. To Priest Yozan, the 28th teacher at Enkakuji, came for an interview a samurai named Ryozan, who practiced Zen. The teacher said, "You are going into the bathtub stark naked without a stitch on. Now, 100 enemies in armor, with bows and swords, appear all around you. How will you meet them? Will you crawl before them and beg for mercy? Will you show your warrior birth by dying in combat against them? Or does a man of the way get some special holy grace?" Ryozan said, "Let me win without surrendering and without fighting." Test. Caught in the midst of the 100 enemies, how will you manage to win without surrendering and without fighting? Chapter 21. Negotiate while advancing. The diplomatic war strategy. People will always try to take from you in negotiation what they could not get from you in battle or direct confrontation. They will even use appeals to fairness and morality as a cover to advance their position. Do not be taken in. Negotiation is about maneuvering for power or placement, and you must always put yourself in the kind of strong position that makes it impossible for the other side to nibble away at you during your talks. Before and during negotiations, you must keep advancing, creating relentless pressure and compelling the other side to settle on your terms. The more you take, the more you can give back in meaningless concessions. Create a reputation for being tough and uncompromising, so that people are back on their heels before they even meet you. War by other means. After Athens was finally defeated by Sparta in the Peloponnesian War of 404 BC, the great city-state fell into steady decline. In the decades that followed, many citizens, including the great orator Demosthenes, began to dream of a revival of the once dominant Athens. In 359 BC, the king of Macedonia, Perdiccas, was killed in battle, and a power struggle emerged for his succession. The Athenians saw Macedonia as a barbaric land to the north. Its only importance, its proximity to Athenian outposts that helped secure their supplies of corn from Asia and of gold from local mines. One such outpost was the city of Amphipolis, a former Athenian colony, which, however, had lately fallen into Macedonian hands. A plan emerged among the politicians of Athens to support one of the claimants to the Macedonian throne, a man named Argeus, with ships and soldiers. If he won, he would be indebted to Athens and would return to them the valuable city of Amphipolis. Unfortunately, the Athenians backed the wrong horse. Perdiccas's 24-year-old brother Philip easily defeated Argeus in battle and became king. To the Athenian surprise, however, Philip did not push his advantage but stepped back, renouncing all claim to Amphipolis and making the city independent. He also released without ransom all the Athenian soldiers he had captured in battle. He even discussed forming an alliance with Athens, his recent enemy, and in secret negotiations proposed to reconquer Amphipolis in a few years and deliver it to Athens in exchange for another city still under Athenian control, an offer too good to refuse. The Athenian delegates at the talks reported that Philip was an amiable sort, and that beneath his rude exterior he was clearly an admirer of Athenian culture. Indeed, he invited Athens's most renowned philosophers and artists to reside in his capital. Overnight, it seemed, the Athenians had gained an important ally to the north. Philip set about fighting barbaric tribes on other borders, and peace ruled between the two powers. A few years later, as Athens was racked by an internal power struggle of its own, Philip marched on and captured Amphipolis. Following their agreement,